Good afternoon, and welcome to our side event. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you very much to our colleagues at the Clean Air Task Force. Our event is on carbon capture and storage in the Caribbean region, and it gives me really great pleasure to be here with my colleagues from Trinidad and Tobago. We've been working with our colleagues since 2017 and COP23, and we've been working with them in their country, and we've been working with them in international workshops since then as well. And we're going to hear about their progress today, and we're going to hear also about how they've been helping a neighbouring country, Guyana, in starting their assessment of CCS for themselves. In addition, we also have what's very important in this process is funding support. We have Acting Permanent Secretary Mrs. Sandra Fraser from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries in Trinidad and Tobago. So Mrs. Fraser, would you like to come up? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Good afternoon to all. As Tim said, I'm Sandra Fraser, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Trinidad and Tobago. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to this COP27 event focused on CCS in the Caribbean region. This event aims to provide an update on the progress and learnings that Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana has made on the CCS front, and it is hoped that these can be used to assist other Caribbean countries and SIDS in evaluating CCS opportunities going forward. I would like to thank the IEAGHG and the Clean Air Task Force for facilitating this event, and I will now proceed to deliver the first presentation entitled CCUS, a Trinidad and Tobago Perspective. So my presentation will just have a context, CO2 emissions, our current CCUS work, and additional strategies, additional GHG reduction strategies. So in terms of location, Trinidad and Tobago lies 11 kilometers off the northeastern coast of Venezuela and is the most southern twin island nation in the Caribbean archipelago. And we have a relatively small population of approximately 1.4 million persons. Our industrial sector is principally driven by hydrocarbon production. We have been producing crude oil for more than 100 years, but our economy is now principally driven by gas. We have several world-class petrochemical plants in operation at the industrial estates on the island. Noteworthy amongst these are our 10 ammonia plants and 6 methanol plants. And as a result of the significant gas production, we currently operate 3 LNG trains. Now, due to our robust industrial sector, we have significant volumes of CO2 emanating from our petrochemical plants. This has resulted in us ranking amongst the top 10 emitters of CO2 per capita in the world. As you can see from the pie chart, we have ammonia production being the largest emitter with 43%, combustion of gaseous fuels for energy industries, 33%, and our petrochemical production, about 9% from our urea, UAM, and methanol plants. And road transportation, that sector, it's about 7%. So I will now speak on our current CCUS work. So in 2021, the government appointed a carbon capture and carbon dioxide enhanced oil recovery committee. This committee comprised members of academia from our 2 major universities, which is the University of the West Indies and the University of Trinidad and Tobago, members of industry from Heritage, our state oil company, and NGC, our state gas company, as well as the Ministry of Energy, which is our regulatory agency. Now, this committee has 4 main working groups to advance the work of CCUS within Trinidad and Tobago. The first working group is the CO2 EOR working group, which comprises representatives from our state oil company and the Ministry of Energy. And the aim of this group is to identify reservoirs for CO2 EOR implementation. Currently, the group is undertaking a feasibility study for our forest reserve field, which is situated onshore on the southwest part of the island. Our second working group is charged with the creation of a carbon storage atlas and comprises representatives from the University of the West Indies and the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And the work of this group is primarily focused on identifying reservoirs both onshore and offshore for CO2 storage. The first draft of the report for the work of this committee is currently being prepared for review. Our third working group, which is led by the NGC, is dealing with methane reduction strategies, and several avenues are currently being explored to achieve this mandate. And our fourth working group is responsible for the development and legislative framework required to implement CCUS technologies and is led by the Ministry of Energy. This group has currently completed a draft legal policy paper on CCS, which is out for review. So I'll now speak a little bit on the additional GHG reduction strategies. Notwithstanding the previously mentioned avenues for GHG reduction, Trinidad and Tobago has also embarked on a number of other initiatives to meet our NDCs. Some of these include our utility-scale renewable energy plant, where our ultimate goal is the creation of a low-carbon economy with an increase in power from renewables to meet 30% of the country's requirements. And we are currently working on a solar utility project with the potential to generate 112.1 megawatts of electricity, which is approximately 8% of the country's power generating requirements. Secondly, in exploring the hydrogen economy, in 2021, a hydrogen economy framework was developed for Trinidad and Tobago based on the production of hydrogen from a renewable resource. The framework indicated that although natural gas will for the foreseeable future continue to be a significant contributor to the country's economic and social development, it is also extremely important to pursue options for hydrogen production that could be feasible for the country going forward. It is also recommended from that study that an intermediate step for Trinidad and Tobago would be to pursue the decarbonization of natural gas through carbon capture and storage as it transitions into hydrogen production from renewable resources. In terms of our CNG vehicle incentives, in the national budget for 2021, all taxes such as customs duties, motor vehicle tax, and VAT were waived on all EVs, provided that the battery was no more than 2 years old. Further, in 2022, for passenger hybrid cars and for private use, with engine sizes not exceeding 5099 cc's and electric motors not exceeding 105 kWs, all taxes were waived to encourage their use and to move away from internal combustion engines, provided that the vehicle was no more than 3 years old. We also had tax allowances for companies engaged in CCUS, So in our 2022 national budget, the Minister of Finance introduced for companies that invest in carbon capture and storage and enhanced oil recovery an allowance on the chargeable profits of the company for the year of income of 30% on the actual expenditure up to a maximum of 500,000 TT, which is equivalent to around 73.5 thousand US. This measure took place from January 1st, 2022. We also are doing some work on a solar park at our international airport, which is the Piaco International Airport, where government obtained a grant of euros 12 million for the construction of a solar park system, which is being built through the European Union's Global Climate Change Alliance Plus, the GCCA Plus program at our international airport. And the sod turning ceremony for this project, which is one of the most largest solar park systems in the country, was just the 26th of July this year. Lastly, we are doing some work in the reduction in venting and flaring operations. So companies across the value chain are looking at optimizing their processes to reduce venting and flaring operations. So in a nutshell, that is the work that we have been doing, encapsulated in 5 minutes for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Acting Permanent Secretary Fraser, for that overall country update. So now we have a joint presentation from my colleagues, Professor Andrew Jupiter for the University of West Indies, Dr. Donnie Boodlal from the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and Dr. David Alexander from the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And the presentation is actually going to be given by Dr. David Alexander. So David, would you like to come up, please?
All right. Are you all hearing me? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to thank representatives from the Clean Air Task Force, the IEAGHG, and the University of Texas at Austin for putting together this side event so that we can be able to give updates as to what we are currently doing in Trinidad and Tobago. My team, Professor Andrew Jupiter from the University of the West Indies, Dr. Donnie Boodlal, and myself, we have formed a joint collaboration between the two major national universities to be able to do work that enhances carbon capture and storage in Trinidad and Tobago. And our permanent secretary from the Ministry of Energy, she did a pretty good job in laying the foundation as to what the contextual situation is in Trinidad and Tobago. So for the most part, people will wonder why Trinidad and Tobago, such a small island in the Caribbean, is interested in developing CCS. Well, the key things that stand out to us is we want to be part of the solution, because simply it affects our food security, our livelihoods, our infrastructure, our full economy. And so we want to ensure that solutions are presented so that the globe could also take part in it. Now, the key thing for us, one of the key things that we have been doing over the years is doing national inventories, so we'd have a good idea of how much CO2 the country produces, simply because what you measure, you manage. And so what we have seen thus far is that we approximately produce about 40 million tons of greenhouse gases, of which 80% emanates from the petrochemical and power sector. And when you break that down even further, the petrochemical sector also generates about 80% from the ammonia and methanol plants. And if we look at the power sector, again, approximately 80% comes from the industrial sector. So this is good news for us simply because we know our point sources, where they are. They are in one key area, and so it's easy to capture that CO2 so that we can make good use of it. The other good news for us is that some of those sources are really close to the sinks, and so we have really good volumes, approximately 4 million from ammonia synthesis and another 1 million approximately from Atlantic LNG from the process emissions. And so those are good targets for where we can start CCS projects in Trinidad and Tobago. Now in 2016, we normally have a major energy conference, and a lot of entities in Trinidad and Tobago were doing their own work in silos. And so Professor Andrew Jupiter from the University of the West Indies decided to try to bring all these parties together, university, industry, and academia. And so we have this group called CERM. The acronym is CERM, and it's the Carbon Dioxide Emission Reduction Strategy Team. And it was joint led by the two universities, and the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries were one of the key drivers in making this team happen. So we had a number of workshops, team meetings, working groups, and we were able to drive a lot of knowledge sharing within the country among all these stakeholders. But after that point, we started to interact with other international agencies, as I just mentioned, the IEAGHG, the University of Texas. And what we have realized is that we need to do something bigger. We need to do more international knowledge sharing, see where we are, and then see where we go from there. So in 2019, the end of 2019, we held an international knowledge sharing workshop in Trinidad and Tobago at the Point Lisas campus, jointly managed by the two universities again, with the support of our stakeholders, of course. And we were able to hold a really good workshop that really translated into our government giving us support. So here we have the Minister of Planning at the time giving her commitment. She is basically saying that she encouraged and supported CCS initiatives, and that the government will drive policy that will enable CCS in Trinidad and Tobago. So that was very encouraging for us at that point in time. So on day one of the workshop, we had really great presentations from all over, from South Africa, from the World Bank, from our local entities. And it was really a vibrant day where we had a lot of information sharing. But on day two is when we started to knuckle down and say, what's next? And so if you look at the top left-hand picture, you'll see that all the stakeholders that were present at the workshop started brainstorming as to what we should be doing. So some of the key stakeholders that were present, other than us obviously, were the natural gas company, BHP, IEAGHG, Equinor, World Bank, the EMA, Shell, and so on. And a number of issues and topics came up as to what we should be doing next. And so we spoke about CapEx and OpEx estimations for those different types of projects. We were considering if we should include or drop EOR. We started talking about strategies as to how to make Trinidad and Tobago carbon negative. But at the end of that session, we realized that we can go nowhere if we don't know what our targets are, what is our storage capacity, what are the sites which are plausible for doing CCS. And so we started moving forward into seeing how we can do a geologic storage atlas for the country. So we started putting the framework together. We started having joint industry and academia partnerships. We signed strategic MOUs between the two local universities and the University of Texas. And then we started going after funding to be able to drive those projects. So we wrote to the World Bank to see where we are at with respect to that through the Ministry of Planning. We started having conversations with the GCF to see how we can enable CCS in Trinidad and Tobago, how that can be funded. And while doing that, we continued our research on doing the carbon storage atlas, putting the framework together, waiting for funding, and we also looked at locally how we do capture, transmission, utilization of the CO2 once we do capture it, and also look at possibilities of depositing in sealing aquifers. So for us, a lot of us at the front, we are experts in the oil and gas sector. It's a low-hanging fruit for us. We think that that's a good place that we can start looking at sequestering carbon dioxide simply because we know the characteristics of the reservoirs. We have infrastructure in place, we have existing facilities, and it will be far cheaper to go after those type of reservoirs when they are depleted rather than starting from new areas. And so one of the key things that happened after the workshop in 2020-2021 was that our government established a cabinet subcommittee that would drive these processes in Trinidad and Tobago. So that would have been our enabling environment to make things happen. So the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries are our key drivers. And it was very heartwarming for us to see that at the very last COP, our Prime Minister made the bold statement that we intend to explore the use of industry-generated CO2 in possible carbon sequestration projects. So when you have your leader giving you that sort of momentum, then it's easy for us to keep going. So that helped us pretty well. And then the cabinet subcommittee have a number of working groups. Our PS are loaded to those already. The key one that I'm speaking about is the Carbon Atlas. So both universities are driving the development of that atlas right now. And we have been very fortunate to receive funding from the Ministry of Energy that kicked us off $300,000 US. I know that's just a small start. We expect more from them in the future. BPTT has also come on board. So we are also exploring what the storage capacity is for their acreage in Trinidad and Tobago. And recently, Shell has also come on board, and they have a lot of good plans for us. In fact, both companies, apart from the ministry, are looking at supporting the universities and this initiative on a long-term basis, because the reality is we believe that CCS is required to be able to meet our targets. You can try all the different strategies, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and so on, but to be able to meet our targets, we need to include CCS. This is not to throw you all off in terms of technical complexities, but simply to say that we are going to do two forms of estimation. The first one is a theoretical storage capacity estimation. We are following the South African model as our template, but we are modifying some of the things to adapt to suit our environment. And so some of the equations that we more or less going to use for those estimations from the Batchu et al. 2007. And for the effective storage capacity equations, we more or less going to use both the Batchu et al. 2007 and the US DOE equations, because we want to have some level of comparison in terms of our estimations. So once we understand where the sites are, what the general storage capacity is, we would move on to phase 2, where we do risk assessment of each one of those reservoirs that we identify as suitable and has the storage capacity to hold CO2. So that's the next phase, risk assessment. In closing, I just wanted to highlight who are the key players in terms of our team. Myself, Dr. Donnie Boodlal, who is sitting there, Professor Rafi Hussein, and Dr. Lorraine Sobas from the University of the West Indies. And as you see, I have Professor Andrew Jupiter in a much bigger caps, intentionally, with a nice red arrow pointing to him, simply because he's the center of our gravity in terms of getting the two universities to work together and driving the initiatives, because a lot is happening in Trinidad and Tobago because of his efforts. So I thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander. And now our colleague from Guyana could not travel to the COP, but we have Mrs. Denise Simmons from the Department of Environmental Studies at the University of Guyana has a short video presentation for you.
Hello, my name is Denise Simmons, and I'm a lecturer within the Faculty of Earth and Environmental Sciences, University of Guyana. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the University of Guyana's actions with regards to CCS thus far. In 2021, the government of Guyana signaled through its policy that all oil producers should explore the possibilities of lower carbon technological innovations. And one of those that was suggested was carbon capture and storage, CCS. As such, the University of Guyana, Guyana's sole national higher education institution, saw an opportunity for it. And therefore, collaboratively, we held 2 high-energy seminars. These seminars were attended by over 100 persons each. These persons represented the media, academia, students, independent consultants, government officials, and even those from the industry. There were presenters in the first seminar from the United Kingdom, the USA, Canada, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. And there were Mr. Tim Dixon of IEAGHG, Dr. Katherine Romanak from the University of Texas, Austin, Mike Moneo from Moneo CCS Solutions, Professor Jupiter and Dr. David Alexander from the University of the West Indies and the University of Trinidad and Tobago, respectively, and Mrs. Janelle Christian, who's a part-time lecturer with the University of Guyana. For the second seminar, there was a representative from the government, Mrs. Pradeepa Boodlal, a representative of ExxonMobil, Mr. James White, and Dr. Lorraine Sobers of the University of the West Indies. Following presentations, excellent discussions ensued. And these focused around a number of themes, such as the regulatory framework for CCS, CCS technology itself, CCS site selection, safety and environmental issues associated with CCS, and there was even the contentious question of whether developing countries should be burdened with CCS. Following these 2 seminars, Dr. Paulette Bino of the University of Guyana led a team which consisted of principal investigator Siobhan Wood and myself. And we're conducting preliminary studies into the greenhouse gas emissions from Guyana's emerging oil and gas sector. Essentially, the University of Guyana envisions itself as an independent hub for the provision of knowledge and research in the area of CCS. However, we face a serious human resource capacity issue. Notwithstanding that, we believe in partnerships, and therefore we're committed to building a team internally as well as working with partners regionally and internationally to work in this area of CCS so that we can understand how it could be a responsible additional mitigation measure for Guyana. I thank you for listening.
Okay, that was Denise from Guyana, Denise Simmons, emphasizing the human capacity developments there, which David Alexander also mentioned or highlighted in red in your presentation. They're very important, as well as the equations for storage capacity. It's the human resource capacity we need to develop as well. So our second from last presentation, this is really important aspect of this. We have Mr. Donneil Cain from the Caribbean Community Climate Change Centre, the 5 Cs, and he's going to talk about some of the funding opportunities for these and other countries. Donneil, would you like to come up?
Thank you very much, Tim. All right, perfect. Thanks. Afternoon, colleagues. I, yes, as Tim mentioned, I'm from the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. We're a regional organization that has a mandate to coordinate the region's response to climate change. If you asked me a year or two ago if I would be standing here talking about CCS in the Caribbean, maybe I would say no, because one of the most critical aspects of what we see moving forward related to climate change is adaptation. Small islands, states in the Caribbean. But we have Trinidad and Guyana that has oil and gas. And it is important that as small island developing states, we still do our part in the fight against climate change. So in the past year, I was approached by the colleagues here as to how it is the 5 Cs could support with this initiative of identifying the baseline information needed to move forward with actions around carbon storage and capture. Of course, capture and storage. Of course, it is taking some work because now I need to switch off from the adaptation and switch into mitigation to see where there's potential financing. This diagram here is the commitments that were made as it relates to climate financing. And maybe we should just zero in on what was earmarked for mitigation. And we see the countries that see mitigation as being critical as a fight towards climate change. These finance flows means that it's signaling countries that we could engage bilaterally to access finance, to access technology, to access knowledge in adapting technologies for CCS. These flows are flowing into the UNFCCC Climate Finance Mechanism, the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, the GEF. We have the NAMA facility, which is some of the European countries that have come together to identify mitigation actions in the countries that can be implemented, and so we could develop projects and submit to that. So there are 2 facilities out of those that are on this slide that I would want to highlight, and maybe even one more so than the other. The NAMA facility and the Green Climate Fund are facilities that exist that we could access resources to mobilize resources for actions on carbon capture and storage. But there are other bilateral partners out there that are interested. As you could see, the partnerships have started to create. The universities are already working together with government, and they've already started to create those enabling environment. Of course, there are certain hindrances as it relates to mobilizing additional finance to keep the work going. Private sector is critical as well. The oil and gas companies are already in there working. We saw on one of the slides presented, 100,000 was contributed by one of the oil and gas company. More could be done. What we need to do is showcase how their involvement in this is critical. All right. I want to focus a little bit on the GCF because I see the GCF as a potential partner in mobilizing resources for this. In the Caribbean, these are a list of entities that are operating in the Caribbean as it relates to the GCF. They are accredited to the GCF and they should be able to mobilize resources from the GCF. I'll skip those slides. The GCF has 2 investment areas, broad investment areas, adaptation, mitigation. And as you could see, under mitigation, there are 4 strategic investment areas that the GCF is providing resources to. Here, Trinidad needs to, mitigate climate change by reducing its CO2 emissions or capturing its CO2 emissions. And so, under the category of mitigation, there is an opportunity for engagement with the GCF. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, and probably will stop on this slide, but there are other slides that just for references. The government of Trinidad has indicated that it intends to apply this technology in achieving its targets as set out in its NDCs. Now, as you could see, the GCF approach is this. Your NDCs, your INDCs, your NAPs, is what guides the country program. What are the set of actions that will be implemented by the country? There is then a set of resources called readiness resources. Each country gets about $1 million per year to carry out readiness activities. That $1 million is safeguarded by the National Designated Authority. The National Designated Authority is the gatekeeper and the one suggesting how those resources are spent in getting the country ready for both adaptation and mitigation actions. Now, here is where I'm suggesting, and I'll spend a little bit more time on the readiness a little bit later, but here is where I'm suggesting there is some resources that could be accessed to mobilize human resources, especially at the stage where Trinidad and Tobago is, and Guyana, and identifying the kind of capacity needed and the baseline information needed to set out targets and then build out projects later. The PPF facility is also offered by the GCF. Once one understands the baseline and what actions need to be taken, and you have a concept note or a project idea, now this needs to be rolled out at scale. The GCF offers up to $1.5 million in the project preparation area. This project preparation resource could be used for feasibility study, environmental and social impact assessment, gender and social studies that could go along with that, risk assessment, some of the kind of information that needs to be gathered around the storage capacity. And once you've gathered all that information, what you're developing is a larger funding proposal. As I said, I want to spend some time on the objective areas of the readiness, based on where these two countries are, where they could access resources for the kinds of actions they want. Knowledge sharing and learning. Before a year ago or so, I knew little about CCS. And many persons within the Caribbean may know little about CCS. And I would say many persons within Trinidad itself and within Guyana itself knows little about CCS. Objective Area 5 related to knowledge sharing and learning. Trinidad could access these resources to partner with other countries who are probably doing this, other firms, universities, to broaden knowledge around this. The strategic framework is already being developed. But if that needs to be advanced even further, resources could be used from the GCF to get those done. The capacity building, if you need technocrats in that space, the readiness resources can also be utilized for that. Objective Area 3 is talking about the planning. That is already ongoing, and you want to roll that out. Strategic Area 4 talks about doing pre-feasibility studies, some of the studies that need to continue to identify what technologies to be used. And then develop project ideas and concept note. That could be covered under 4. Once we have utilized these objective areas under the readiness financing that is available from the GCF, it opens the door of opportunities to say, where do we go from here in terms of identifying the more strategic actions to be scaled up using larger financing from the GCF. Just to say, as a public service announcement, the 5Cs is accredited to the GCF for up to $50 million US. This might take more than that, but we need those studies done, we need those baselines, we need to understand what actions need to be done. The 5Cs might not be the only accredited entity that will be working closely with the government of Trinidad and Guyana in mobilizing financing for carbon capture and storage. Thank you.
Thank you, Donneil. So now I'd like to invite up Dr. Katherine Romanak to give a wrap-up of the session, and then we'll have questions.
So I think really in wrapping up the session, what we've seen is an incredible story of a small island developing nation that decided to get on the path to CCS. And we know that it takes a long time to develop CCS in your country, but I think here we have an example that small steps can lead to big results. And here we have a small group of champions for CCS that developed partnerships with experienced organizations and then started engaging their government, industry, and academic stakeholders to start thinking about if CCS could be right for them. And very importantly, a point to make is that at an early stage, they made sure that CCS was inputted into their national strategy documents. So very important, because funding bodies such as the GCF will only fund technologies that the country has designated as important to their national strategy. And then we see the support from the accredited entity at the 5 Cs is so important in helping them to take the next step going down that path to find the funding they need to develop their capacity. Now they're developing a storage atlas to assess the options that are available to them and figuring out where are the sources, where are the sinks, and what's the capacity, how much CO2 can we actually store, and is the geology right to store that CO2? And what we're seeing, another very strong point here, is that when your storage is assessed, the industries will come. But why would a small island developing nation want to do this? They have a small emissions footprint, maybe large per capita, but you know, you'd think they'd want to focus more on adaptation. But it's because that they want to develop in a sustainable, low-carbon way. To spur their growth, and what choice do they have? What options do they have to find the same prosperity enjoyed by other nations, yet do it in a sustainable way? And so we see this beautiful South-South learning with Trinidad now leading the way, taking Guyana by the hand, taking them down that same path to see if CCS could be right for them and start that process all over again. And I think this is technology transfer at its finest. So working together with the support of the government, ministries such as the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Ms. Sandra Fraser, and the help of the funding of the accredited agencies such as the 5 Cs and the GCF, I think we're getting a glimpse of what the possibilities are for us as a global community to realize the very goals that we're all working together for. Low carbon growth and economic prosperity, protection of our natural resources, country-driven with the support of many stakeholders. Trinidad is an amazing example of how we can all realize our goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. Excellent wrap-up there. So now we'd like to invite questions from the audience. And do we have the second mic? Eadbhard, do you have the microphone already? Okay. So we have a question over at the back there and one in the middle. So we'll take Olivia, Belinda, and then Arthur. Olivia.
Hello, Olivia Powis, head of the UK office at the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. That was incredibly interesting, thank you. And I just wanted to ask really what you thought was the biggest driver for you to be able to move forward. The introduction from, at the beginning, set out a really comprehensive suite of ambition and action really from the government. And was that the thing that really enabled you to move forward on this quickly?
Professor Jupiter, do you want to answer?
Thank you very much. Let me say first of all that, as the Permanent Secretary stated, we have been in the business of the oil industry for the past 100 years. So in terms of age, we are a senior member of the World Oil Producing Fraternity. And it's in that context we fully understood the following, that in order for us to move forward in any project, we must have partnerships. You name the company that is operated in the industry in the world, and you will find that that company operated in Trinidad and Tobago. And what we learn as a small country is that you must develop partnerships. That's the first point. So the first point is that the government clearly decided that we will support CCS, as you heard about it. But prior to that, we need to have some individuals who are committed to support us, as I spoke about partnership. That's the reason we are here today. The first presentation that was made to COP was done by Dr. David Alexander, just as how Denise made the presentation today from Guyana, who recorded. But that was only done because we had the support of the University of Texas, Dr. Romanak, who's here, who allowed, and we also had Tim at that point in time, Dixon, and we also have Mike Monier. That was the opening phase. How Trinidad and Tobago can get involved in that, in carbon capture and storage. After that, every other COP, we were allowed through the direction of Tim and Kathleen and Mike for us to present a side event. So to answer your question, the government recognized that we were important to move this forward. And what the government did, as the PS said, the government formed a carbon capture, utilization and storage. And not only forming it, but it did a little more. The government gave $300,000 to the universities UWI and UTT. And that's the reason we are on. What did the companies did? Again, partnerships. BP, TT gave $100,000, 50,000, 50,000. Similarly, Shell, and my understanding, 50,000, 50,000. My understanding is that other companies and those who are operating in Trinidad and Tobago are willing to support CCS. So in summary, partnership was the key. Looking at Trinidad and Tobago not as a country but a mature oil province, that we can make a contribution to carbon capture, utilization and storage. We have the resources at Point Lisas and Atlantic LNG, that's CO2. We have experience as a pipeline company through National Gas Company. The only company that has put forward a 56-inch gas pipeline in the Western Hemisphere as such. That's the transportation. And the third point at Nexus is we have the reservoirs. The reservoirs which have been there for over 100 years plus. So there's a reverse spin now from where we started. And we have the skills, may I say. That's the reason we have the Ministry of Energy personnel here, together with the PS Terrence. We have Dr. Boodlal, and we have Dr. Alexander, together with all the persons. The skills are important. And the capacity building by the two entities that I just mentioned, the University of Texas, which we have an MOU with, and IEAGHG. So thank you very much for that question. I appreciate it.
Hi, Belinda Perryman. I've worked 10 years in CCS and I've probably never felt so encouraged. Thank you so much. So whilst we might feel like it's already done, obviously there's a lot more hard work to do. But thinking also of the gas fields that the islands still have that are producing, my question is around, for the future fields and the future of the islands, could you combine the source of the CO2 and the sink for the CO2 in producing gas reservoirs to create hydrogen at the site, and then use that CO2 for enhanced gas recovery, and so create more gas and then create more hydrogen, really looking to the future of a hydrogen economy. And again, you know, the islands maybe can lead the way in that area as well. So I just wondered, is it something, enhanced gas recovery with hydrogen production, that would be something you've looked at or would maybe consider looking at? I'd be very interested to hear your experiences.
All right, thank you for that. So, to be honest, we have done some studies for enhanced gas recovery at the university. That combination with hydrogen it sounds very interesting. We have been looking at it in other jurisdictions, what they have been doing. I think it all ties to what our PS was saying in terms of getting CO2 to be utilized in the right places, because she did mention about carbon dioxide enhanced oil recovery, some strategies that they are looking at there. I think that the local companies are the ones who would drive the enhanced gas recovery side of it, but we could partner with them to do so. It's a good idea. And probably we could hear more about what your ideas are in terms of converting that into hydrogen, because it will be a new concept for us in terms of how we produce those reservoirs.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the question, the response, Dr. Alexander. We encourage the concept of synergies amongst the industries, right? So it's called industrial ecology, and exactly what you're talking about is something that we are conceptualizing and looking into. While we have a lot of emissions for a small island, you would have heard most of the emissions come as a result of producing ammonia. And hydrogen is one of the feedstock involved in ammonia. So for our 10 petrochemical plants, ammonia plants, to continue in a sustainable manner, as well as marrying with CCS, what you've raised and established to use that CO2 for enhanced gas recovery with hydrogen forms part of the industrial ecology perspective that we are looking at. So thank you. It is something that we in Trinidad and Tobago have acknowledged, and research is ongoing. Many things we're following the classical pathway from research to deployment, and this entire model and approach you've heard about today is along that pathway, and we're happy to share our experience along that pathway as it pertains to CCS. What I like is, though we're doing it for CCS, because of what we're learning as a developing nation, as we move along that pathway, we can then take the other solutions and technologies that forms part of that industrial ecology and accelerate it along that pathway. Climate change and the adverse effects of climate change is not CCS problem to solve alone, Trinidad problem. We all have to do a part. So we are encouraged and open to exactly what you are speaking about. That is why we would have fostered relationships with the University of Guyana, our neighbors to the south, who now have an emerging oil and gas economy. We being a mature one, and have pursued further along the CCS pathway. So yes, and that is why we are doing the storage atlas, so that we can actually quantify and estimate the capacities to then accommodate for that.
Hi everyone, Paul Zakor from Carbon Counts. Nice to see David and Donnie again. It's been a couple of years. Just thought I'd mention in the financing opportunities that the voluntary carbon market could be a route to market, early opportunity funding source as well. ACR recently extended the scope of their methodology for carbon capture and storage to include Mexico, and I don't see any reason why it couldn't also be extended to cover Trinidad and Tobago, depending on the legal situation there. CCS Plus is working with Vera. Also, we see what could happen when they finally produce the methodology, and also, as well as some work that I'm involved with the Global Carbon Council to develop a CCS methodology within the VCM. So I think there's a few things going on there that could actually really be an accelerator here for some of those early opportunity projects. So I just thought I'd mention that, and you have my details, so you can always send me an email, Donnie, no worries. Thanks.
Thanks for that.
Oh, okay, last question.
Hi, thanks again for the wonderful presentations. I'm Nadira Ojir with the Commonwealth Secretariat. So I think in the spirit of us being here at COP and really the imperative for us to accelerate action. You know, to me, what we've heard here is really an inspiring story about all of the precursor, all of the preparatory work that needs to be done in advance of getting to actually implementation, which in itself takes time and a lot of resources. But you've done a wonderful and shared a wonderful positive story, and part of that story you were keen to learn from others. But I think it's just an observation rather than a question, that I think we should think collectively about how to share this experience with others so that it can accelerate this type of work in other regions, in other types of situations where it can be done.
This is such an amazing story, but this has to be recreated over and over and over again. We need to be out there finding, you know, which developing countries have the option, and then we need to be catalyzing that at an amazing rate. And so we really do need to come up with a way that we can just recreate this in a faster pace. So I definitely would like to talk to you and work with you and see, you know, if we can't come up with some really creative and innovative ways for helping that, because we're seeing more and more countries that we're engaging with getting champions into their countries that want to take CCS forward, and it is a complex process that needs to be simplified. So thanks very much.
Okay, so to wrap up, so to speak, our host Eadbhard will say the final words. Thank you, Eadbhard.
Thanks, Tim. On behalf of Clean Air Task Force, I'd just like to say thanks very much to Tim and everyone at IEAGHG, to Katherine from UT Austin, to the fantastic researchers, and to Sandra, and this wonderful initiative that's going on in Trinidad and Tobago. Clean Air Task Force carbon capture is an essential climate tool in the toolbox that we're going to need, and it's great to see that, you know, this is definitely something that we're going to explore further in the Caribbean and in other small island developing states and developing nations. So yeah, thank you very much for a wonderful event. Really, it's been an honor.